Hey, Melanie.
Derek,
Good to see you again.
always.
What's going on?
I'm enjoying a dark and rainy, stormy, misty morning in Boston.
You're enjoying that.
I'm enjoying the quiet that it invites
Mm,
inside of you. You know, it's like
okay.
permission to like be a little slow.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I've seen rain. It's been that long. I've just been traveling in places where it just hasn't rained or it rains overnight. So like I wake up when the roads are wet, but I don't actually
Yeah.
see the rain falling out of the sky.
Yes. Good. Good question.
But for today's recording, I was thinking about it earlier today and I was realizing that if this was a movie, we would be recording our origin story.
Oh.
So, just to give folks a little bit of background, and some people already know if they've watched our intro, we've known each other for a very long time, but we started the origins of this podcast started when we were invited to participate in a summit called the Boston While Black Summit earlier this year. And so I was the moderator, you were one of the panelists, and then we just got such great feedback from people who were in the audience that we decided to turn this into a podcast.
That
So
you brilliantly thought to turn this conversation into an ongoing conversation in the form of a webcast and podcast. Yes.
and you so graciously accepted, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, no, it was good. And, just to give people an idea. So here were our marketing cards for when we were speaking, and we were talking about building power through property ownership. And so we're just going to continue that conversation a little bit more with the founder of Boston While Black and the founder of the summit.
Yes. Someone I am quite a fan of, always inspired by Sheena Collier, who's our guest this morning, who inspired the move to have create this platform, this conversation that we're doing here. She is the founder and CEO of the Collier Connection and Boston While Black. With 20 years of experience in business development, growth strategy, brokering partnerships, and event design, she has a proven ability to build communities by getting the right people in the right spaces and moving them to take action. And I observed it and experienced it in person over the years. And she is quite a force. There's a reason why people call her Big Sheen. In 2020, she founded Boston While Black in the midst of the pandemic. An idea that she had been germinating for some time, and then the moment just seemed right. And I'm so glad she launched and took that step. Boston While Black is a digital and in-person membership network created to helping retain Black professionals, students. I would say recruit and attract and retain Black professionals, students, and entrepreneurs in the Boston metro region through access to a digital community, culturally relevant virtual and in-person experiences, and authentic personal and professional connections. Boston While Black is it's envisioning and creating a Boston where Black people want to live and work because they have the spaces, tools, and relationships to find their tribe, grow their network, navigate the city, and have fun. And that's the experience. And so we're so excited to bring Sheena in today and hear what she's thinking about what we're doing and what she's seeing in the city. Welcome, Sheena.
Yes,
Well,
thank you for joining us.
thank you all for having me. I'm so excited to see this platform take off.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Do you want to talk with us a little bit about why Boston While Black? Why now? What you're excited about the impact that it's having?
hmm Sure. One, I'll just start with. You talk about impact. Like as you all opened with, you created a podcast off of a conversation that you had at our How to Boston While Black Summit. For me, that is the ultimate kind of example of what Boston While Black is trying to do. We want to change the perception of the Black experience in Boston, but really just our Black experience in this country, but changing the reality. And
Yes.
a lot of that, the key part of that is us being able to have these conversations and forums and be in community with each other and really figure out together how we change it. Because we know that, none of what any of us are doing or saying is new necessarily. But I think that what we're hoping to offer to the world is some some creative solutions, some different kind of twists on the solutions that we've tried to implement in the past, and sustainable solutions.
Yeah.
So not things that are just an event or just a initiative or program, but things that are really about generational change. And so I have started it, as you mentioned, in 2020, but I've been in Boston a little over 19 years, or about 19 years, and this is just another form of work that I've been doing here for years. A lot of it in the past was focused more specifically on children and families. My background is in K through 12 education, but it was always about this connection between community, family, and kind of like policy. And
Yes.
how do we make sure that everyday folks understand the even like micro decisions that are impacting them, and how to have a voice in them and a
Yeah.
say in them. And so when I got here, I was doing that with parents at the Winthrop Elementary School in Roxbury, and helping them to understand the policies. At that time, this was like No Child Left Behind years of education. And so
Mhm.
helping them to understand all these changes that were coming. Um, on the side, if you will, I was doing Boston While Black type things because I also was a transplant to the area and trying to find my way around. I actually remember Derek from way back then. I didn't know you, but I lived in Fort Hill. It was like
Yes.
the first neighborhood that I moved to was Austin Brighton, and I hated it. I lived in Harvard Square because I went to Harvard. A realtor told me if I wanted to stay in Boston, I had to live in Austin Brighton. And so
Huh.
I moved to Harvard and Comm Ave, hated
Hmm.
it.
Oh, wow.
And, though I was young, it was too collegey for me.
Yeah.
I was like, this
Mhm.
is too much. And so I worked at the Home for Little Wanderers in Jamaica Plain. I would take the number 66 bus to South Huntington. And I, through Craigslist, discovered this apartment on Fort Ave. And that was really my first feeling connected to Boston when I moved over there. But I had already been here about 2.5 years, two and a
And
half,
just so
3.
people understand, Fort Hill is a section up on a hill in Roxbury that you could say is what remains, at least in our imagination, as a historically Black neighborhood. A lot of Boston was historically Black, and has been annexed and reconfigured and renamed and refashioned. But much of Roxbury, or what still remains as Roxbury, has not because of redlining. And Fort Hill is this nook. It's this place on the hill up in that neighborhood. It's gorgeous.
It
And,
is.
yeah, it's a place where people convene and build community.
And it was my
Oh,
first place where I threw house parties in Boston.
hmm. I hope I left a good impression because you said you recognize me, you know me from then, but we didn't know each other
I
well.
think I just remember your name. I was on listservs about,
Okay.
it's when I first started to get. Prior to that, I'd been a part of communities at home in Albany. I lived pretty much between 3 houses my whole life, so I didn't really move around a lot. Like, I really am
Mm.
still attached, to the places where I grew up, the houses I grew up in. But, I went to college, so I lived in dorms. So coming here was really my first time living on my own in a community. And so I got on all the listservs, and so there was Fort Hill is a very civically active
Yeah.
community. And so so I just remember seeing your name back then. And even after that, because I worked at DSNI and all of that.
Oh, you touched a lot of important institutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot around like space and where people live, and how people convene in communities. And it wasn't intentional. Like I said, I went to school for K through 12 education. However, even my focus in Harvard, you don't have to do a thesis at the ed school there, but you have to do like a master's project. My master's project was about family and community engagement, like the mix between family and community, and how important that is for children's education, because that's what I felt like was the difference for me. I had a family and parents and a community that was very invested in my education, and that's why I did well, kind of regardless of where I lived, because I wasn't in the best place and I wasn't in the best schools, but I
Mhm.
had a really invested family and community.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, that apartment, I literally found a flyer recently, an email that I sent out for this house party that I had there because, I was broke, so I didn't have furniture, so I had a lot of space. And it was like how I started to get to know Boston, was inviting people into my space.
So Sheena, speaking of convenings, what was it that drove you to think about organizing a summit for Boston While Black?
Yeah. So I really believe in the importance of moments and having people in one space to be able to learn together. And even before Boston While Black, the membership, I always had this idea of essentially having a crash course of kind of how to Boston While Black in both the civic, corporate, kind of social community culture that's here, particularly as it pertains to being Black. How could someone who moves here, even someone who grew up here, really in a couple of days be immersed in that? And particularly hear from people, everyday folks who are leading in these different areas. So, as you all know, we had topics that range obviously from housing, but also dating and how to get, meet your Black elected officials and how to work, navigate working, being Black and working in tech here. And so it's an opportunity for us to take what we're doing through Boston While Black throughout the year and really amplify it for a couple of days. We've started to have, this was our second year, the one that you all spoke at, people actually come from out of town even for this, because they do want to learn, like, how do you Boston While Black? Like, what does it mean to be Black in Boston? I think even just the name itself sparks curiosity in people. So I wanted to be able to, essentially, the whole kind of underpinning of Boston While Black is based off of not just my experience of trying to navigate the city, but our tagline, find your tribe, grow your network, navigate the city, have fun. I actually sat in one of my girlfriend's car one time and wrote down what I felt like helped me to feel more like a Bostonian. And that was what I came up with. The wording was a little different, but that's what it boiled down to. I found a strong group of friends. I was able to get on a career path and really get connected professionally. I learned the navigate the city is kind of like, there's so much to navigating Boston. There's resources, there's neighborhoods. And I really, over the years, felt like I got a handle of that. And then the having fun part, which to me sometimes feels trite to people, but you have to have a social life.
Yeah.
You have to have good experiences. And so that is what I'm putting forward as kind of the formula for Black people belonging in a city. And the summit is a way for us to live that out in a couple of days.
And it is rich. I mean, you roll up, it's in a hotel in a really beautiful section of the city. At least this year, it was in Back Bay.
Yeah.
And you've got, I mean, this year is probably like 700 people.
Yeah, we had about 750 people.
Hundreds of Black folks of all stripes, walks of life, ages, in one place, and it's just so warm. And that's just what you do, Sheena. Like, even the Boston While Black family reunion is a whole other epic scale of a happening. And historic, and not historic necessarily, but in the Seaport area of Boston, an area that is at this point recognized for its skyscrapers on the waterfront. And you have, I don't know, thousands. How many thousands?
This past summer, we had a little under 8,000 people there.
Jesus Christ. So it's like Black folks take over this section of the Seaport for an entire day, and they're just playing. I mean, it makes you almost want to cry. They're literally just playing. They're playing games, they're jumping rope, they're dancing. And so the fact that you can create these spaces, I'm getting chills just talking about it, is so important. That fun part is actually not trite. It is such an antidote to the daily battle of how do we function and how do we grow and how do we push ourselves and how do and it's like, it's just that we actually get to be and find each other and be soft. And so that is so exciting. And it is important, I can say, because I help people relocate to Boston. I help professionals make choices, honestly, about whether they're going to take this university position or this corporate position. And it's not about, is this going to work for me professionally or academically to root with this institution in Boston? But it is a national question of, can Black folks move here, feel welcome, and enjoy it and build a life here? And so you are actually, like you said, putting out this formula that helps answer that question right out of the gate. And it's so thrilling to be part of.
Thank you. You gave me chills. I'm like, ooh.
I mean, one thing I would add, I mean, just having gone to the summit, is I like the fact that there is an element of agency that is being presented as well. So
Absolutely.
agency to sort of meet your representatives, or to be more focused on your dating life, but also to share information, because I think that's
Yes,
something that also gets lost in Boston a lot. Is there are a few people who have a lot of information.
that's right.
There are a lot of people who have almost none. And so this was just a great opportunity to share and have information shared with you, or with all of us, so that you felt like we were all empowered and all enriched in some way.
Yeah, some of the Collier Connection is my first business, and some of the impetus leading up to that, literally, y'all, my friends had to have a Sheena folder in their email inboxes because I share so much. Any listserv I'm on, any mailing list I'm on, any billboard I see that I snap a picture of, I'm constantly taking it. I read everything, and I'm constantly taking in information and sharing it with people like instantly. Like, I always want people to know what I know.
Yeah.
My friends would joke, like, I literally have to have a folder just for your emails because you send so much stuff. And so I decided to create my own email list before I really had any type of business, because I just was like, all right, I'm sending things all the time. I want to do it in a streamlined way. And then the Collier Connection kind of was born out of that. I started as an event planning company because that was the business model that I understood the most about how to connect people. But a lot of it, really the core of it, the core of Boston All Black as well, as you all said, is about the sharing of resources and information. And someone, myself, who's gone to Spelman, gone to Harvard, worked at a lot of important institutions and throughout Greater Boston, I really see a responsibility to give people access to the information and the access that I have. So that's why I'm going to put together a summit and have elected officials that I can easily access, but not everyone has that type of access. And I think it's important that, people don't feel like, oh, of course she has the access and can contact them. Like, no, I want you to meet them as well.
Yeah.
As Derek said, you have to take agency. One of our mantras through Boston All Black is create the city you want to live in. And so I'm putting the people in front of you. I'm putting the information in front of you. It's up to you to really utilize it and take it further.
Love it. And what you did is invite members to pitch topics for the forum, for the summit. And so we pitched talking about the impact of the power of Black people owning real estate. And what does it mean to have property ownership? How are you building power through it? And you can think about that in so many ways, your own individual economic power, economic freedom, but also civic engagement. Being a homeowner, being a property owner, even if you're owning, as I said in our summit talk, even if you own a parking lot, right, you're having impact on the community around you. And so I'm curious to hear what lights up for you about this level of engagement for Black folks as we get plugged in, as we take some of the tools that you're putting out before us and the networks. And I'm telling you, Sheena has a ridiculous Rolodex. Like, I need to talk to the mayor. I need to so and so. She's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll just get, so it's wild. She really is that. She is so humble, but she is so really truly connected. And so I see you kind of as a lightning rod where lots of things can happen because all these different resources and connections swirl around you. So what do you see in Black folks, particularly in the Boston metro area, historically dominated by white power, white property ownership, and white political power? What do you see for us in terms of owning real estate, owning businesses, starting businesses? Just talk to us.
Yeah, well, one, I love the name of your session because, people, there's a lot of real estate agents in Boston, a lot of Black ones, a lot of people that are trying to build their platforms, if you will. And so a lot of people pitched about kind of real estate related topics. But I love the building power piece because, one of my many theories about Black people in Boston and the space we have and haven't taken up here is the lack of ownership.
Yes.
We're always asking for space. And so we have the ability to be moved at someone's whim.
That's
When
right.
I worked at Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, I worked there like 2013 to 16 or 17. So I'm quoting this stat. I just don't know if it's still accurate. But at that time, um, Roxbury was about, almost 70% renters. And, a lot of the work of DSNI was around development without displacement, and, they have a land trust and all of that. But imagine, I mean, this is what motivated me to finally buy. I bought a house about 5 years ago. I was tired. I actually felt unsafe that
Yes.
someone could decide they
Yes.
wanted to raise my rent. Someone could decide they wanted to whatever, sell the house, and I had to move. And like at the drop of a hat, I had to move. And over time, I felt really unsettled by that. And so
Yeah.
I made it my mission to buy a house. Now, when I wanted to buy, I had to move outside of Boston because of costs. Um, but so I just, as we continue to have these conversations, and I think again, it's not a new conversation, but I do think there's a renewed energy in Boston around who belongs here. Is it welcoming? I definitely see some of the influence of BW of Boston While Black, where people are talking about joy and belonging, and like those are things that are even what politicians are talking about and corporate leaders. A huge part of that conversation has to be about what we own.
Yes. Amen.
And that's on the home ownership side as well as the commercial spaces, so that we can have spaces to do events. That place where we do the summit is beautiful. It costs a lot of money. And we have to, not for that space in particular, but for spaces that we use, negotiate with them and help them to understand the cultural relevance of what we're doing and why we need certain things at
You
our
can smell it.
And so because I am someone who's connected and has the resources and the relationships, I'm able to broker some of those conversations. But even with all of that behind me, I still have challenges with convincing people sometimes, like, no, this is why we need this type of food here. This is why we need this type of it's really so I know for people who have no level of connections like that, they're not able to push things forward. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of an unofficial space mayor here. So people do call me when they're not able to get spaces.
Yeah.
Like they want me to help them to broker conversations with spaces. And so
I'll interject that you've just
Yeah.
been recognized by our governor, because you've been just appointed to, I don't know if it's called a board.
The board of directors for the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
one of the spaces that it oversees is the Boston Convention Center, which is a
Yeah.
major place for big corporate convenings. The NAACP
Yeah.
convention just took place there a week and a half ago. So the fact that you are part of that body speaks to the level at which you're having impact in raising the questions, raising the consciousness about the importance of access. But yes, it's a thing you still have to be working at and navigating.
Yeah. And I do work through the lens of Black people. I believe that much of what I'm doing is going to benefit everyone.
Yes.
Most of what I'm doing is going to benefit everyone.
It already is.
I just do it through the lens of Black people and the Black experience. And so, yes, even this appointment onto the MCCA board. So the MCCA owns a lot of land. There's the BCEC that you mentioned that we all know, but there's the Hines, there's the Mass Mutual Center in Springfield, there's the Boston Common Parking Garage. Like they control a lot of space in the state. And so being able to be at that table, it's very new. And again, raise these issues of who has access, who works here, what type of events are you all doing is going to be really, really important. And frankly, y'all, it's like a little scary. It's a 9-person board. Like this is, it's not like 150 person, but like this is like every board member counts.
Yep.
And people are really watching and paying attention. And so, I have to muster up my own kind of you belong here and yes, you belong at this table because, I was saying to one of my team members the other day, we have these general conversations about who has a seat at the table, but a little more nuanced than that because there's different tables at different levels.
Yes.
So there's some tables I have a seat at that other people would say like, oh, you have a seat at the table. And I do. But then there's new tables that I'm trying to get at. And it's scary, you know, on every level, you're kind of the underdog again, and you're
Yes.
trying to prove yourself, and you're trying to, and with this space conversation, both around land and around buildings, that is where the power lies.
Amen.
And so people don't give that up easily. People don't let you in those spaces easily, because they, and historically, people, you know, particularly white folks have understood. I mean, you can tie back most of the injustices in this country to something that has to do with land or space.
Amen. Shivers. Yes.
And so people know the power of it. And
Yes.
that's why we've been kept out of it. And so the more that we understand and even find ways to pool our resources, because we may not have it, of like, how can we own more space?
Yes.
So this part of the conversation is getting me to think about a question that might be splitting hairs, but I want to ask the question anyway. So when thinking about residential real estate, self-preservation, gentrification, being moved out, do you think there's a difference between Boston while Black and Metro Boston while Black?
As far as the issues,
As far as the issues, as far as the access, just in whatever ways you might see that. And again, I might be splitting hairs, but
Yeah.
it just kind of came to mind when you said you moved out of the city to be in the suburbs. And so I was like, well, how does that change the dynamic? Does it change your perspective?
yeah.
Just any thoughts you might have there.
Oh man, I have many. One, I'll say for myself personally, having or making the choice to move outside of the city perimeter, the Boston proper. One, it opened my eyes to, I mean, I knew this because I've been here for a while, but now I'm a part of it, of like, these other towns are like actually pretty Black. You know, I'm in Randolph, I'm next to Brockton, I'm next to Stoughton. And, you know, they sometimes call them, I know they call Randolph sometimes kind of like what do they call them? Bedroom towns, because everyone sleeps here, but works
in the city.
Works in Boston. And so I've even struggled myself. Again, I've been here for 5 years in this town. I couldn't tell you much of what's going on in Randolph. I'm still very focused on Boston. And I'm not saying it like a source of pride, because I pay a lot of taxes out here. But, you know, I feel like I can't, my energy is really focused on, you know, I've become a Bostonian. So I see Boston as like controlling everything. And so that's where I pay a lot of attention to. However, I do think there's a lot of opportunity in the neighboring towns of Boston where a lot of us are moving to also organize, to also even, you know, I talked about this with the mayoral candidates in the last race, that the city of Boston should be paying attention to these folks that live, because we're the people that work in Boston.
Yeah.
And so there should be more of a relationship between Boston and these other towns, particularly when you're talking about the Black experience in Greater Boston and Massachusetts. You know, the Boston Foundation put out a study a couple of months ago about the growing Black population in Boston, Greater Boston. And a lot of it is outside of the, this is not an exact statistics, but it's flipped where, you know, 20, 25 years ago, the majority of Black people in Massachusetts lived in Boston. Now, I want to say less than 40% of the Black people in the state actually live in Boston. And so just what that says for the power in the surrounding towns, that could be activated. So it is something that even with Boston While Black this summer, we've been doing these neighborhood meetups and really tapping our members that live outside of Boston to host meetups in their town. So there was a Quincy one last weekend. There's one happening with folks in Metro West. And so we are really saying like there are Black people in these other spaces. I think over time, again, there has to be more of a strategy that just, I mean, Boston is one of those places. I guess this happens other places. I was just in Atlanta a couple of weekends ago. You can say you're in Atlanta, but you can be in a lot of places. Yes. You say you're in Atlanta, but you're
crawling. Yeah.
Fairborn, or, you know, Boston is people in Boston are like, no, you stepped over this line. You are not in Boston.
Very provincial.
Yes.
And I think that for strategizing, this is the same conversation I have with native Bostonians about Black transplants, of we can keep dividing and keep saying, I said, but if we're trying to gain power, we need to be having like a united conversation, because there's still really not that many of us in the bigger scheme of things for us to keep dividing ourselves up.
Oh my God.
And so, and that can go on and on. Black American, Caribbean, like we just find all these ways to keep doing that. And it's, it's fine for, funny competition. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to build, we have to figure out how to build together. And that includes, people in Boston proper and Black folks outside of the city.
There is so much you said that I want to speak to. And I want to just also thank you, Derek, for always asking a brilliant question, about the Metro experience. First of all, I will say that I'm a little enraged, and I have my own personal, I don't know what it is, upset about this, about the fact that more and more Black residential presence, real estate presence is moving out of the city. Not just because I'm a realtor, but because I'm a homeowner here. I own a multifamily. It's unsettling to me that I'm not surrounded by other folks like me in my section of the neighborhood that I'm in. It's uncomfortable. It's because it actually reminds me how small we're like thinning out. And it is harder to get into these spaces. It's harder to buy in these spaces. There's so much to say about that. And that it's really because of policy. It is because of economics that people are having to move further out. It used to be that we could only be in the city. And now that capital wants to be in the city, commercial capital, people with funds who can buy property, significant funds, they don't want to be in the suburbs as much. White money. It's like to be in the city is a premium. And so it really is unsettling to me that more and more of us are moving out. And this is happening everywhere. It's not just happening to white folks. It's just happening, period. We're at a point now where the suburbs, these bedroom communities of the city are reaching out of state. They're reaching to New Hampshire. They're reaching to Rhode Island, right? So you've got a lot of people are moving to Providence, right? It's on the train, it's on the commuter train, and that's what you can afford. That's your bedroom community now. Your life, your social, civic life, a lot of that is still in Boston. You still go to your doctor in Boston, but you take the train and you sleep in Providence, right? So that says a whole lot. But so it's like, well, what does it mean then to see ourselves as an important demographic that is this outflow? And so actually that Boston Foundation report that you talked about, the CEO of the Boston Foundation is actually going to be speaking at a conference or a panel in a few weeks. And I'll be actually on a secondary panel to that talk about the impact of, well, Black folks are moving out of the city because that's what they need to do to find housing they can afford, whether you're talking about renting or owning. But that is moving to the communities that you described, Sheena. That is working class communities, and that's important. But that outflow is not going the same level to the wealthier western suburbs of Metro West Boston. So your Wellesleys, your Newtons, your Needhams. So I will be on that panel to speak to that. What does it mean that we are getting shifted around by the forces of economics? But at the same time, how do we capitalize on that and say, actually, that means we're building this wider web of connectivity, of impact, of raising the conversation that it's not just about the hood. It is about Black presence in this metropolitan area. And how do we get the kind of economic and civic control that we should have?
And you're building upon something that, as a native Bostonian, I find very interesting. So my grandfather actually bought his first house, I think his only house, in the 1950s in the town of Kingston, which is next to the town of Plymouth. So it was like way, way, way outside of the city. And so as a child, I would always go from Boston to Kingston to go visit my grandparents. And there was never this sense of dislocation. For me, it always felt like it was an add-on.
That's interesting.
So, as you're saying, as more Black people are moving out of the city, you're feeling a little bit sort of, I don't know if isolated is quite the right word, but maybe sort of not lost, not isolated, but just sort of like a sense of loss. It's weird because I never really felt that as someone growing up in a much whiter, much more segregated Massachusetts when I was younger. And fast forward to the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, when I was the executive director at Discover Roxbury, and we were doing tours of Roxbury. the sense of connection, even if people didn't live in Roxbury for decades, they still had that feeling of like, I am from Roxbury. I am from here. I haven't lived here in 30 years or 40 years, but I'm from here. And extended to the Black community, to the Jewish community, to a lot of other, even Italians, so that I didn't even know Italians lived in Roxbury. They would come to the tours and to the events and they would say, we are part of this community. So I hear what you're saying in terms of the economic factors, in terms of some of the social factors, but I think the sense of community and belonging and connection can really be very fluid. And I think if we can find a way to tap into that fluidity, we can possibly create new types of communities. Because yes, Black folks may not be moving to the wealthy Western suburbs, but that doesn't mean in a generation or two, they don't create new wealthy suburbs.
Yeah, I love your vision. And part of what my scope is limited because I wasn't born and raised here. I'm a transplant like Sheena. I've been here just the same amount of time she has, 19 years in Boston. And yeah, so I look at it with a certain kind of critical lens, but it's not as a long arc of time about where families and generations of families have been and moved. Yeah.
One of the ways that, and this is, let me think where I'm trying to start. So something I thought about as I was listening to you, Derek, was how through Boston While Black, we use technology as a way to create community. So as you all know, we have a digital platform, an app, and it allows people, we have members from all over the state, really. We have members outside of the state actually, but it allows people in this way. And that's just the time we're in, right? We're digital communities. Now I'm an in-person person, and however, I started a business during the pandemic and I had to quickly learn how to build community online. I mean, the world shut down, or Boston at least, like March 13th or something. Yep. I remember March 28th, I had a virtual party. It was called Virtual Vibes. and I did it throughout the whole summer. And so I had to get familiar with Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. But when we had the summit, one of the topics that we had was from Black Planet to Black Twitter to Boston While Black.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about how Black people have been at the forefront actually of creating community online. We didn't recognize it as that. And I don't think we really took advantage of that. Because if you all had Black Planet or MySpace pages, you had to do a little bit of coding. Like it wasn't like now where you just put in your information. Like you actually had to, and I wish that we would have understood that we were all coders back then and really like gravitated toward that space. But I'm bringing it up to say, like, there are ways that we are making community, able to build community, even as we're spread out.
Yeah.
But still being able to feel connected to each other. I think that, I think this is just probably a human thing, this way that we identify with a place and we identify with a place, and so then we identify with the people that don't belong, are not of that place, are from that place. I mean, people do it with sports teams. Like, I think it must just be something human because people do it so much. But a big part of what we're trying to do through Boston While Black is say, yes, be proud you're from Roxbury, be proud you're from Albany, like wherever you're from. Right now, we're all in this space together, and we need to figure out, because we can identify with these spaces. But again, we don't own a lot of them. And so how do we make sure that we don't just claim spaces, but we actually start to own them? And whatever that means, whether that means owning a business, whether it means owning a house, whether it means owning some other type of property, being in a political power. Because my concern, and I've seen it from where I grew up to now, and it's something that happens, is that we get so tied to repping things that don't belong to us in reality. And then we, kind of back to what I said, can then get swayed by that thing. Like, as you were talking, Melanie, I was thinking about this kind of joke. It's not really funny, that I say to my friends sometimes, of like, when you think white people are going to want to go back to the suburbs and we're going to have to move again.
That's right.
Right. Like
that's a question in my mind.
Yeah. Like that's what happens, right? Like now we're all moving this way, and we all got bigger. We all got more space and more real estate, and we're figuring out. When I first moved to Randolph, it was unsettling to me how quiet it was because I'd been in the city. Now I'm used to it. Now I do my thing in Boston, and then I come home to my quiet space, right? But,
Yep.
but what's going to happen in like, now I'm an owner, so I can stay, but what's going to happen in like a decade when people are like, you know what? We're tired of being close to each other. We're tired of this. We're tired. We want to go back to having more space. And it really, really to my core bothers me that we're such at the whim of other people
Yes.
deciding what we do next.
Yes.
And it never allows us to really, for real, put down roots and feel
Yes.
comfortable.
Yes.
Because we're always shifting. My father died in 2008. I had to, he still lives in Albany. He lived in the same place for 30 years, never owned it. So I had to clean out 30 years
Wow.
in a week, because the landlord, who's known my father for 30 years, was like, cool, I get it. Your father died, but I got to rent this out next week.
Mm-hmm.
So now I have to go through 30 years of memories and clothes. And it was just like, I was like, wow, like how disposable we are.
Yes.
Like how
Yes.
different it is when you don't own your space.
Yes.
And so, I think that I'm, glad that conversation is happening about other neighborhoods. That report definitely raised a lot of questions about just where are people moving to. There's obviously very real financial reasons why we don't own a lot. And my hope, particularly you all who are experts in this, is, through this and other platforms, that there's more conversation about how can we collectively own. Because I think about that a lot, even with Baltimore Black. I'm 100% owner right now, but I think about like, how do we even build a company that people can have some financial ownership in?
Yeah.
Because where I went to Atlanta a couple weekends ago to see my friend, and we went to church, and the sermon was about where your heart is, your treasure should follow. Essentially, you pay attention to what you put your money into.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that there is
I love
a lot for us to do around, even if it's the pastor gave an example, we're in church. So he was talking about when he started tithing. He said, yeah, when I started tithing, then I wanted to know, like, what did the church do with my $5? Like, you just have a buy-in that's different.
Buy-in, huge.
You just have a buy-in that's different. And so I think that I'm glad that you all are like kind of taking this conversation on the road and really framing it through the lens of power, because it's something I hope comes out in your conversations as well. I'll speak for myself personally. It's also demystifying some of it, because some of the reason I didn't buy a house for so long in Boston, I wish I would have bought. I lived in Fort Hill in 2006.
Come on.
Like, if I would have bought a house back then.
Come on.
But to me, it was so, I thought you had to have like $1 million off, like in your bank account.
And back then,
I had no sense of it. I had no sense of what it took.
Yeah.
My father, I just told you, never owned a house. My mother she bought a house in the 70s in Albany, but in a way that you would never be able to do it now. In short, she was driving through this neighborhood, saw a for sale sign. She was like in her early 20s, went to the owners, and they somehow signed the deed over to her. She didn't like buy the house.
Yeah.
Just something that you could do in the 70s that you couldn't do now.
Okay.
So she never went through a house buying process.
That's right.
They were basically like, take over our mortgage.
Yep, take over our mortgage.
And so I didn't really know anyone that had really like went through the home buying process. So to me, it was like, oh my God, like this is so unattainable to me. So I hope also that kind of demystifying and helping people to see, put in, each of your friends put in 5,000, like whatever people can do, but just really like, how do we make this more accessible for more of us?
Sheena, when we were thinking about how to pitch the talk to Baltimore Black for this year's summit, a kind of subtitle for it in our minds was "We Can Own Things." We needed the topic to be more explicit, but emotionally, energetically, what the topic was is we. And what does that mean for us to own things? Right? That's the thing we've been divested of for generations, and like still thrilling to just think about it put our attention in that direction of like, what does it mean if we just start owning stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what will the response be too from the wider society once we do start owning stuff?
Yeah. You know, I mean, part of it is people, they won't love it, but we're also at like an ownership table, you know, and I think that again, that we can own things energy
Yeah.
also should come with some support for each other. Cause again,
Yes.
like I said, even for myself on the MCCA board, you know, people have a like, oh, you're a boss, you made it, you know, you
That's
moved
capitalism that make us think that.
right, like you move through these spaces, but I have to remind, you know, I'm not really like a public complainer, but to my friends, I'm like, y'all, yeah, I'm in these spaces, but I need y'all's support. I need the energy. I need because they're looking at me walking in. I I look younger than I am. I got a dress on. I usually got a flower in my hair. Like they're kind of like, oh, this kid, you know, like I sometimes have to actually say in conversations in those spaces, well, you know, when I went to Harvard 20 years ago, like I have to just flex
Yeah.
because I'm having to reassert myself and why I belong there and why they probably think I'm some type of diversity,
Right.
you know, rep or,
Mhm.
and so I think that as the we can own things is definitely a financial side, but absolutely a mental and emotional
Yes.
side to it.
And
That,
that's what our talk was.
yeah,
Yeah.
we have to
Right.
because it does money.
Yes.
The need for money and capital is real, but
Yes.
it also really starts with belief and like that you
Amen.
believe that you can own something. And I have many nieces and nephews, and you know some that are a lot that are in their 20s, and I'm always preaching this kind of like, no, you can do this. You have to think that you can.
Yeah.
And you know, I have one of my nephews who is still in Albany and um works one of those jobs where you're doing double overtime just to make a little bit. But he told me one time what he had made in a year. He's like 25. I said, you could have bought a house.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He's buying like used cars and because
Oh,
in his mind, and he kept saying, I'm gonna do that when I get older. And I said, why? You actually make he was making like 75,000. I
yeah.
was like, you could buy it in Albany.
In Albany.
I'm like, you
Mhm.
could buy a house, you could buy a parking lot in Albany. They're selling lots. I told you like for like $600.
Oh, come on. Yeah.
So, but his mindset to him, that's something you do when you're older and when you're. And I was like, listen, you already make what you need to make, but it's something more inside. It's not about financial. He doesn't see himself as an owner. He's grinding on working overtime and it's, you know, it's hard, and that's a family member, right? So I'm working on him to instill this message in him, but
Yeah.
you have to believe it for yourself.
Am I a grinder or am I an owner inherently?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
Well, thank you, Sheena. We covered a lot of ground here, and there's so much more. I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I know you're a busy person. You have a lot to do, so we won't keep you any longer.
We could have a part two. We could
Yes.
find time for a part two.
We'd
Yes.
love to have you back for a part two. If you're willing and you have time, we would love to have you back.
Yep, definitely.
And to everybody who's viewing, if you have questions that you want to ask Sheena, put them in the comment box wherever you're watching. If she has time, she'll try to answer your questions. We'll try to get them to her. But again, she's very busy. You heard about all the things that she's doing. But we hope to bring her back to continue the conversation, and maybe we'll get a chance to answer the questions then. In the meantime, thank you all for joining the Black Lining Forum, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.